All right, before we get started, are there any other questions, comments, concerns, anything at all? Nada? Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, panelists. This year, as a focus for GIS, we will be talking about government responsibility, liberty, and natural as well as individual rights. All of the questions asked will in some way be related to one of these topics. So before we get started, I thought it'd be great if we just had some introductions. So I'll start off myself. My name is Rajit, and I am a senior at William B. Travis High School. I've been co-chair of the GIS Speaker Committee for my freshman and sophomore years. In addition to that, I have also been the GSA's Enrichment Coordinator. Outside of the Global Studies Academy, I have been president of Model UN and SWAC, as well as part of the Travis High School swim team. Outside of school, I have volunteered with Congressman Olson's Congressional Youth Advisory Committee, as well as Raj Shahotra's City Council campaign and Dinesh Singhal's judicial campaign. It is my pleasure and honor to have an enriching conversation with all of you. Hopefully that will be a lesson for students for years to come. Who else wants to go next?
For this, you can just unmute yourself if you want to go. So I'll pick who goes first. Oh, Miss Callie, were you trying to talk? I don't think we could hear you.
I was just going to suggest that you all pick who goes in order since we can't see.
Would you like to start us off?
Sure. I'm Akilah Rubaii. I'm a professor of anthropology at Purdue University and the co-founder of the Isla Reparations Project, which is a nonprofit organization.
Great. Bailey, would y'all like to go next?
Bailey and Spencer.
Sure. All right. Hopefully you guys can hear us. My name is Bailey, and this is my husband, Spencer. We're streaming to you guys from Dallas, Texas. We've lived here for a few years now, and my husband Spencer is a seminary student, originally from California, but he transplanted to the great state of Texas once we got married. And I'm a Houstonian. I actually was part of the first graduating class of the GIS, or the Global Studies Academy, and so really neat to be here with you guys, and I'll let Spencer share a little bit about what we do.
Yeah, I'll keep it short, but we are directors of the Windrose Project, which is a Christian worldview building and leadership organization. We work with youth around the country, and this is exactly what we love doing, getting together with young people and asking big questions and pursuing truth together. So we're really happy to be here with you guys. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Miss Natasha, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Natasha Paradeshi, and right now I am enjoying this time that I get to spend with my son. I have a 2-year-old, Zachariah. I was scared he was going to scream and yell in here, but my sister just took him out for a walk. But I am one of the co-founders of The Landing, which is an anti-human trafficking agency here in Houston, Texas. I just stopped working full-time as the executive director, and now I serve as the board chair over there. I also help my husband part-time. We have a media company, Solace Media, working with small businesses and local nonprofits here in Houston to help them with their marketing and media needs.
Perfect. Judge George, would you like to take it away?
Yes, good afternoon. I am KP George, and I'm, like initially I mentioned to Ashley, I worked with Fort Bend ISD around 4.5 years. I was a school board member, born and raised in a remote village in South India, and came to this country, and now I am last year and a half. I'm the top elected official in Fort Bend County. Fort Bend County is the 10th largest county in state of Texas. Soon I'm hoping we are going to be the 9th largest county in state of Texas. And I'm the first South Asian to be elected as a county judge in state of Texas.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Would anybody like to go next? Anybody want to raise their hand and try that feature?
Jan, would you like to go ahead and take it away from here?
Sure, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Jan, and I'm a Naval Academy graduate and military veteran who has called Fort Bend County home since 2013. I'm the founder of an organization called the Xena Project that facilitates mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being for veterans, law enforcement, first responders, and families. And I serve as called and able to in our community. On the political front, I've been privileged to be part of some efforts and some individual efforts to promote personal freedoms here in our community and in our state. I'm thrilled to see a lot of familiar faces on this forum, and I want to thank you, Ashley, and your team. Thank you so much for the opportunity and all the hard work. It's a joy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. I really appreciate it. Miss Bacy, would you like to finish us off with introductions? I don't think I'm missing anyone.
Hi, yeah, you can hear me.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Akilah Bacy, and I am from Houston, Texas, and I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas, particularly the West Houston area. I am born and raised out here, and I am currently an attorney who focuses on defense and discrimination work, and I do pro bono immigration work as well. Currently, I am running for state representative in the area in House District 138.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here as well. You all have such busy schedules, as I said before. So I'm going to let Rajit take us into questions, and I'll be keeping track of our time as.
Awesome. All right, that's great. So let's start off. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Is that motto still applicable in an increasingly complex and, as some would say, dangerous 21st century? Please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to answer that first question.
Okay. And then I'll see here, is there anyone? I haven't seen anyone yet. All right, Judge George, go ahead and you can start us off for this one.
This is an interesting question as far as I'm concerned, because I'm in the middle of dealing with, if you all don't know, COVID-19 pandemic. And so just and how do you draw that line? And I believe United States, in my opinion, is the best place to live. And I have 2 girls, and I tell them always, I remind them, you know, this is the best place to be growing up, you know, because you have the freedom, you have the liberty to express what you feel and pursue what you like to pursue. And that freedom is here because I lived in another part of the world, other side of the globe, and you know, and they also have freedom. But even as you know, I had to sign an order almost month ago to shut down the county. And but the thing about it is, I always mentioned my goal was not to arrest people or punish people, because I know that Fort Bend County residents are responsible. But at the same time, I grew up in India, and I have seen they enforce their law using force and, you know, beating up people, those who got out. And so, to be honest with you all, you are young leaders, and I believe I don't believe in that, you know, because I believe in individual freedom with responsibility. And so I believe we should have all options available, and it should be disposed at our disposal, and it should be exercised with caution. That's what I feel.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bailey and Spencer, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. So it's funny, when I was in high school, I did a speech explicitly on this phrase, or this great saying from Ben Franklin. And of course, my views have grown and changed a lot since high school. But what I realize more than ever now is how important it is to not create a false dichotomy between freedom and security. Because I think that at the end of the day, you need both. The important thing is to remember you always need both, because you could be free, but if you don't have security, then you die quickly, and what good is freedom then? But if you have all the security in the world, but it's an authoritarian regime, it's hardly worth living there either. So I think Ben Franklin, the wisdom in what he's saying here is that you can't try to pit one against the other or choose which one is more important. So the challenge for us as young leaders in a free society is to always strive to remember both is important, both are important. And we should never sacrifice one and put all of the, the focus on one over the other, but rather always strive to create a just and ordered society that protects the essential freedoms and liberties of all the people.
And I know we're thankful for Judge George and so many other leaders like you, sir, who are working in real time to balance both liberty and safety in the midst of the crisis. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's hard. It requires a lot of wisdom. So thank you, Judge, for what you're doing.
Ms. Jan, I see that you have your hand up as well. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you so much. So from a military perspective, I mean, you swear to support, defend the Constitution of the United States. And that is what I think of when I read about essential liberties, when I hear that term. But I am challenged by the thought that people could be more or less deserving of those liberties based on their willingness to fight for them. Because the fact of the matter is, we all have unique places in our society, which is what makes it wonderful and beautiful. And as Judge George spoke to, there's so much opportunity in America. Not everybody's built to fight. Not everybody's called to fight. Those of us who are, take it as our privilege to defend those who choose or are not able to. So just because someone's point of view at that particular point in their life or their own capabilities or callings may choose, they may choose not to fight, doesn't mean I won't fight for them or my brothers and sisters in arms. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Colley, I saw that you had your hand up. Is there anything you'd like to share as well?
Sure. Yeah, I just have 3 points on this topic. The first is that I don't think the 21st century is more complex or more dangerous than any other time, or that the United States is particularly exceptional as a place. So for example, global climate crisis started a long time ago, and a lot of people noticed, they just didn't have the voice or platform that some did. So Native Americans said, hey, you're destroying the land, damaging Mother Earth, and nobody listened. So I just want to be really clear that we're not in a unique moment, and we can turn to history and historical precedent to better understand our understanding of how we act in this particular moment. I do think the motto is relevant. And it might be more updated by the voice of Naomi Klein, who calls it shock doctrine, that in moments of crisis, people are willing to accept conditions that they would otherwise balk at in the name of urgency. And sometimes this can mean revolutionary possibilities that happen in crisis acceleration. So like factory workers who seized Venezuelan factories to co-own them was a beautiful moment. But it often means that people are willing to give up a lot out of fear, and they often give it up to those in a position to further violate them. So as a critical military scholar, I pay attention to how eagerly people will accept being brutalized and surveilled in the name of security, when in fact, they're actually losing the very components of citizenship or civilianhood that they seek to maintain by choosing to diminish their demands. So Edward Snowden just published a warning piece. I can't remember what it was called, and he argued that in the name of a quick fix, we've all accepted what he calls the architecture of oppression. So programs like Zoom, which we're on right now, are part of this digital architecture, which we eagerly accept, check all the yes boxes to, as a temporary measure to make urgent adjustments without necessarily considering the permanent structures that are later used or activated for unjust purposes that could limit our rights to privacy or voting. So the trick, I think, is to insist on accountability and reciprocity being built into the architecture of emergent systems. And I think this is what others were talking about when they talked about making sure that we don't all necessarily have to fight in the same way for the same thing, but we need to make sure we have a system of accountability.
So much. I think Miss Natasha's hand is up.
Yeah, what I want to say really, really quickly before we move on, what I'm seeing is working a lot better than what we'd originally planned. If you want to respond to the question, we are going to ask you to raise your hand, and then we'll go through everyone that's risen their hand. And then after everyone that's risen their hand has spoken, if someone has a comment to someone else's response to the question, then that is welcome to be natural and flow, or you can raise your hand, whatever works for you. But I see Ms. Colley is agreeing with me, so good, we're on to something here. So Natasha, you can go ahead and go, and then once you're done speaking, go ahead and lower your hand, just so we can keep track of who's already spoken. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment to make about this because I didn't really understand the context of this quote. And so I did just a little bit of research on this quote. And really what it was about was this actually a pro-taxation and pro-defense quote during the French and Indian War time. And I just didn't realize that because we've often thought about it in terms of just privacy. And so I just thought it was interesting because today, yes, pro-taxation and pro-defense, it's very relevant still today.
For sure, for sure. Is there anyone else who would like to, I think, Ms. Colley, you still have your hand up? Is there anything else you'd like to add to this topic?
I just didn't know how to lower my hand.
Awesome. All right, so transitioning on from this topic then, the United States was purportedly founded on John Locke's principles of natural rights and individual liberties. Have we lived up to the promise of our founding principles, and in what ways, if any, have we deviated from them? Again, Judge George.
As I mentioned before, we are the best in the world, in my opinion. Okay, so when it comes to individual liberty and also freedom of expression and things of that nature, I was fortunate to, obviously I grew up in India and I traveled to China or Taiwan and other places, Middle East and places like that. So, and I believe we are still, and are we perfect? We are not. But at the same time, under the circumstances, I believe when it comes to individual freedom and liberty and things of that nature, and I believe we are still a beacon in this world, and we are still continue to thrive. And then also another thing, as a staff elected official, we struggle, especially these days, to how do you balance that? When I don't want to infringe on somebody's personal freedom, but at the same time, my responsibility is to save and protect especially the most vulnerable population. They are our senior citizens, our parents and grandparents, our uncles and aunties. They made who we are, and they contributed to make our community what it is today. And we have, I believe, a moral obligation to protect them. And also, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic situation, my struggle every single day, how do you balance that protection versus liberty, and how do you balance it? And we very glad to say that we draw a pretty good line. Most of our citizens are well behaved. There are some rowdies out there, but still we, our instruction to our police officers, our law enforcement officers, not to arrest them, not to write them tickets, and we just communicate with them, hey, what you're doing is not okay, things of that nature. And so I'm a big believer in individual liberties and freedom, but at the same time, how do you draw that line? So that means I believe we have a very good system in place, and we are, in my opinion, the best in the world when it comes to these individual liberty and freedom, things of that nature. So it is, of course, are we perfect? We are not. But I was able to one-on-one, try to draw that balance. Last maybe 6 weeks time. It's not easy, but under circumstances, I still believe we are the best. Thank you.
Ms. Colley, I saw your hand up next. Would you like to say anything about this?
Sure. So a couple of things. John Locke has been so widely discredited in so many ways. So I wanted to offer some quotes from founding fathers and mothers who might better articulate the concept of freedom to me. Audre Lorde says, "I'm not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." And Martin Luther King said, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." I think what these two great thinkers are saying is that individual liberties, which are sometimes called freedom too, are integrated with collective justice and equality, sometimes called freedom from. So the idea that there's a separate line between natural and individual liberties is a line that's somewhat false and is used to bolster individualism in a way that does harm to the collective. because the personal is political, because individuals are never separated from their communities, I think we really mean equality when we're talking about freedom and the just distribution of resources and rights and health and safety. And unfortunately, this is a slave-based, genocidally founded country. And so a lot of the founding principles are based on the freedom of some to oppress others. We even gave personhood to corporations while continuing to undermine the personhood of Black and Brown communities every single day. So I think we want to think critically about the use of the word freedom and really leverage the kind of thinking that Martin Luther King or Audre Lorde is promoting. And I think that that is something that we're all working really hard to do now.
Thank you so much. I see that your hand is up as well, Ms. Natasha. Would you like to add anything?
Well, that was beautiful. And yes, I agree with Ms. Cully. And I also just wanted to add that I think we try, but I also think that we have to acknowledge the areas that we fall short in. For example, we see that in the 21st century, we have victims of trafficking, and that's just the area that I see individual liberties being taken care of and people being imprisoned unjustly. And so we are still taking away these individual liberties and freedoms that that people have. And so through the work that I've seen and the victims of trafficking, we still have a lot of work to do. And that's the same in the same case with many other vulnerable populations.
Ms. Jan, I see that your hand is up as well. Would you like to offer anything?
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to take a slightly larger, more human stab at this and talk a little bit about the spirit of the founding principles, because, you know, we can talk about words and there's a lot to be learned from each other there. But I think what Judge George said is the most important thing. We're not perfect, but we're the best solution in the history of the world on a number of fronts. And what I see that has changed most specifically in the last decade or two is that we used to be unified around that. People on different ends of the political spectrum had different ideas about how to solve problems, but people would come around the table agreeing upon the fact that America sure is a beautiful solution and place to be. And it concerns me that a lot of times I don't see that sentiment as commonly expressed as it should be. The best solution I know for that, and this is what I would encourage the young people listening on this, you need to go travel, you need to see the world, and not on a cruise ship, not on a luxury tour of Europe. You need to go see the more harsh parts of the world, you need to breathe them in, you need to smell them, you need to exist and work in them. And then you would be very hard pressed not to come back and love America. So I challenge you to do that.
Thank you so much. Miss Bailey and Mr. Spencer, I see your hands up as well. Would you guys like to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. First of all, as far as John Locke, I think it's really important to point out that America is not the product of one man's ideas, right? And John Locke, great thinker, I appreciate his stuff. Don't agree with all of it, but America is built on what the founding fathers said was self-evident truth, right? So it wasn't just the figment of John Locke's imagination. Hey, imagine if we could create a world where, you know, people had rights. No, according to the founding fathers, and the beauty behind the Declaration of Independence is that they actually believed human life has value.
All human life. Because,
as they put in the Declaration, all men are created equal because they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And so this isn't something that people dreamed up. We're not playing make-believe. When we talk about justice, we're talking about a real thing. When we talk about human rights, we're talking about a real thing. And so that's the beautiful part of the American project. And I think that to the extent that America has strived to uphold those principles and live up to those principles and protect the intrinsic value of human life, we have been exceptional and an amazing country and one of the greatest stories in the history of the world. To the extent that we have deviated from that principle and forgotten about this founding truth, which our founders claimed was self-evident, that all life has value, we have failed to raise the bar or even meet our own bar. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I know a lot of people tend to look back on American history in a very polarizing way and like, is America all bad or is it all good? And it's just like us. We're not perfect. The founders were not perfect, but the ideals that they handed down to us and the structures they gave us to create a free society where we can pursue truth with a capital T and protect the intrinsic and inalienable value in all human life. That is, well, I mean, look around. We live in the greatest country on earth. Because of that, we are very blessed. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And so if we're not able to give credit where credit's due, we're going to cut ourselves short. And by taking those blessings for granted, we stand to lose them and squander them in the long run.
And the only thing I would add to that is, I think, as several of our wonderful fellow panelists have mentioned, looking back at our history and learning from it is incredibly important. And it's important to look back sympathetically or with respect to the challenges that our founding fathers and, you know, earlier Americans have faced, and to also consider how we can do our part in upholding these principles, specifically the principle Spencer mentioned, that every human life has value and is worth protecting with equality and justice under the law here in America. And we have a part in that. I mean, we live in a country where we govern ourselves and we get to participate in the process. And so it's important to ask this question of how have we lived up to these ideals? And I think we need to include ourselves in the we. You know, are we helping our nation live up to this founding principle? And that's a charge I think we need to consider every day.
How much do we value life today? Are we part of, you know, our communities in a way that honors and respects the lives of our neighbors? Are we serving the people around us? Are we loving our neighbors ourselves? Are we cherishing the intrinsic value of all life? Those are important questions for us now, and as it was for all people in all places and times. So yeah, thanks for letting us jump in there.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. Ms. Bacy, I see that you have your hand up as well. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to just go ahead and echo the sentiments of Callie over here and what she was speaking about as far as not only the history with Locke in this quote, but the true history of America. I hear a lot of the conversation saying we're not perfect, but, and you know, and things of that sort. And I think that that's a great perspective, and it's coming from a perspective of what our nation is now, just a huge salad bowl, a huge bundle of ideas. But what we have to remember is that we're not talking about a blip in our nation's history. We're talking about calculated actions that laid the foundational ground that are based off of discrimination, disenfranchisement, and dehumanization of not only African Americans, but Native Americans. And not only that too, but also many poor European Americans. So to say that we have individual liberties, I would have to necessarily disagree with that and say that what we see more in America is we see that we have economic liberties at this point. And we have to think about it in this thing is that we say, you talk about it as, oh, well, 2 decades ago, we all agreed on that America was the greatest nation in the world. Well, also we have to think about where was our world 10 years ago, right? Around that time, we have to think about it. Was that not around 9/11? I believe it was. So of course we're going to have this huge upsurge of patriotism when something like that happens. But also what 9/11 we think about did was it really opened up a wide purview for many Americans to see the world globally, to see exactly America's position in the world. And so we have to think about it from that perspective as well, too. Within those 10 or 20 years, we've had much more access to the internet has grown significantly. Travel has grown significantly. So we have to think about it. Maybe that might be where some of the criticisms or the disagreements come on where we stand or whether or not we've met that mark as America being solely the greatest nation in the world. Of course, I am proud to be an American. I would not want to live anywhere else. But there's a quote by Baldwin that I love that says, "I love America, and that's why I criticize her daily." And so we have to think about it from that perspective too. Just because we are not because we don't, we don't agree on every principle of America doesn't mean we don't love her or we don't love our country. But we do have to not just pass over the ugly truths of American history, but we need to accept them and grow from them and learn from them and realize that they were not just blips, but they were huge foundational structures that have given us the society that we have today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bacy. Judge George, I see that your hand is still up. Is there anything you'd like to follow up with?
I just wanted to add something there, and I'm kind of agreeing with everybody what you're saying. And Fort Bend County is an example of we are not perfect. Fort Bend County is where 1822 Stephen F. Austin invited 300 families to come to settle in Texas. There was no Texas at that time. And they came, and Fort Bend County has been incorporated in 1837. And this is a place where we had a lot of injustice. Our first African-American sheriff got killed in office. And our first African-American commissioner was ran out of this county because of his ethnic background. And this is a county where until 1953, we had a white-only primary existed until 1953. But being said all that, we are the best, and that's what I wanted to come back to. I wanted to echo to Jan's point, and I tell you, I was in Foshan, China last year before. When I go, and I love to talk to children, and a class of around 40, 50 seniors, and one final question I asked them, hey, you are about to graduate from this high school. What would you like to do if you can do anything you want? I mean, there is no limitation. You could just do whatever, you could just decide. And I tell you, more than 95% of the students said they wish they could continue their studies in the United States. 95% of the children, okay? So we have imperfection, and I love history, and I studied a lot of this stuff every day. I read it, understand. And the same Fort Bend County I'm talking about, I am a person who is not even born and raised in this country. I'm the top elected official in Fort Bend County. And so we have imperfection. We have injustice happen in the past. But coming back to Jan's point, and I 100% agree, the more you appreciate when you travel the world and come back. And I have seen, Jan, I wanted to say this, the most tolerable people in our country are the people who served in the military, because I could tell that immediately when I talked to them, because they have traveled the world and seen how things are, and they have a better perspective towards a person like me, and I could have a good conversation with them and things of that nature. And I guess what I'm concluding saying here, as much as we are imperfect, and we are the best out there, and I continue to echo that, and thank you.
All right, we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to transition the topic a little bit. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "One has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." Continuing from the previous question, do citizens have a natural right to disobey the local authorities if they feel that their individual liberties are being stifled by certain things, such as, for example, the quarantine orders that we're facing?
And I do want to go ahead and point out, as all of you are thinking about this, I really appreciate the conversation that we're having, because we can see differences, but we're also seeing points where we're all coming together on certain things. And I appreciate that. And I think for our students watching right now, that's what we need to work on in conversation, similarity, and where can we all start, and then talk about everything. So we're going to let Jan talk, but I just wanted to put that in there, and thank you guys for making that so apparent today and your leadership.
Thank you so much. And I want to echo that, Ashley, and also say that that's a testament to the environment you all have created. So thank you. I love this question, and I love it for a lot of reasons. First of all, as a veteran, you swear to uphold, support, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You do not swear allegiance to an individual. You do not swear allegiance to some misty thing. You swear allegiance to a codified, well-articulated set of principles, which makes that word feel very dangerous. Because you may feel that your liberties are being stifled, but are they actually? Do you actually know what the document says? Do you know the rules, policies, and procedures that were created and established by that document, and what authorities each level of government has, right? So if you haven't read it and you don't really know what it says, your feelings will lead you astray every time. So what I would encourage the young people listening to do is read it. Learn what it says. Learn to read cursive. Read it in the original. Don't trust interpretations. Get to the root of the document. Take it on. Be proud of it. Then you won't have to worry about what you feel. You'll know what you're actually upholding in our society. And by the way, it absolutely does give our duly elected leaders authority to act in what, through a variety of checks and balances, comes to be determined as our best interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see Miss Bailey and Mr. Spencer have their hand up. Is there anything you guys would like to add?
Yeah, but we just raised our hands, so I know that
Okay, for sure. I'll get to
people were ahead of us in the line.
Miss Bacy, I think your hand was up as well a little bit.
Yes. So looking at this quote, I think when we talk about, and it happens a lot with MLK especially, is that content is key here. And we're talking about this quote where he talks about civil disobedience. This was, you know, and of course, in light of the civil rights movements and things of that sort, this was not in the face of what is currently a pandemic right now. It was not in the face of, as far as the civil disobedience, it was not because of inconveniences. And so I think that here in Houston, I'm speaking specifically from Houston, and what I believe to be a lot of Texas, is that there are no laws or rules or stipulations put in place with our COVID restrictions that are infringing on our just freedoms. They are inconveniences, certainly. But I think that we have to make sure that when we pull out quotes like this, that we're not rallying armies for minor inconveniences in the long haul here. So my take on this is, like, it's my answer. What it boils down to is no, I do not believe that based off of the current pandemic that people have or should decide that they're going to rally up and disobey these laws that are meant for the greater good in our health as a society.
Thank you so much. Judge George, I think your hand's been up for a little while. I'm not sure though. Would you like to add?
I would be brief there. Let's reverse that question. I at least know 3 families. 3 girls lost their dad last week. 9, 7, and 4. 3 beautiful girls. And I know a father who lost his son, who was a university student, 21 years old. And I personally know another person who was in the 70s, and their children lost their father. And if you are one among them, would you still protest? That's the question I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think Ms. Colley, your hand's been up for a little while. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what others were saying, that Martin Luther King is talking about unjust laws and fighting injustice, sometimes by disobeying the law and sometimes by other means. And it's the injustice that's the powerful part here. The idea of individual liberty is a little bit evasive because we might mistake our limits to consumer capitalism or convenience to be an injustice when it's not. Yes, of course, disobey unjust laws, uphold just ones. We should always be fighting injustice. I'll just give one example that I think is important. Wisconsin voters were told that there was some voter suppression happening in Wisconsin because of coronavirus. They were told that mail-in ballots wouldn't work, and they had to choose between potentially their lives to go out and vote and giving up their vote. And a lot of people came out and voted. And I think that was a really interesting moment where some might say they were being irresponsible by going out. Others were saying they were upholding their civil liberties by going out. That that's an example of the kind of arena that we might be seeing more and more during the election year, where we have to be thinking about this quote really carefully. But I think this question is meant to aim at, do we have the right to sort of do whatever we want in a moment when liberation is actually a project where we are all working collectively and suffering in different ways to protect each other. And this is all about justice, and a quarantine practice is about upholding justice in that way. Our task isn't to not get sick, it's to take turns, to share the burden, to stretch out the resources of hospitals and communities, and it's a project of collaboration that is testing, I think, our relationship with the public that we love. And our task is about minimizing the impact on weak systems, right? Like, who counts as human? Whose bodies need protection? What kind of healthcare system are we going to fight for? And what kind of democratic voting practices are going to be in place in a moment where we have a crisis? So I think the question is almost ahead of its time, because I think it's going to come up in different ways as we look at the restrictions to ability to vote.
Thank you very much. Ms. Natasha, I see your hand up, and after that we can get to Ms. Bailey and Mr. Spencer.
Yeah, for this I was just thinking about my dad specifically, who is an ER doctor, and I just think about him and his colleagues, and if he just came out of the hospital, was treating these COVID-19 patients, and went straight to the grocery store because of his individual liberties to go pick up groceries right afterward, and the responsibility, that wouldn't be great. I also think about my friends who are, immunocompromised, and what are we doing when we are just like we've been talking about, just inconvenienced and really not caring about each other, loving each other as ourselves, and loving our neighbors, when we are so focused on inconveniences that we don't look at each other and truly care about how we're protecting each other's right to life and well-being. And so that's what I'm thinking about whenever I'm hearing all of the other panelists.
Thank you so much for sharing. And finally, to Ms. Bailey and Mr. Spencer, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Raj. So the doctor, Reverend Dr. King, is one of my favorites for so many reasons. I'm not alone in saying that. But I agree with a lot of what's been said about the context behind what he's saying. And I also wanted to add a little bit about maybe you'd say the philosophical or theological context behind what he's saying as well. And something I really love about Dr. King is the fact that he's really focusing in on the fact that, again, like, your rights are real. The value of life is real. Justice is real. These are not human constructs. They're not social constructs. They're not something John Locke invented, but this is something that God created, right? Your rights come from God, not from government. And therefore, when government violates that natural divine law that God lays out in creation, it is the duty, the moral imperative of a free and just society to reject that violation of natural law, right? So that's the background for what Dr. King is saying. And the bottom line is, free, good people bow down to God, not government. And so if government is overstepping those bounds, well, you know where your priorities are. But the bottom line here is that if we lose sight of what Dr. King was saying, and we become very legalistic with our sense of freedom, and I see this happening a lot today, where people tend to elevate freedom to be the ultimate good in itself. And therefore, if government ever does anything, they tell me to stay inside, it's violating my freedom, it's unjust, and how dare they, and I'm going to revolt. Well, first of all, check out, the virtue of prudence. The founding fathers wrote a lot about this. Prudence is really big. They write about it in the Declaration as well, in fact. The fact that they didn't revolt from England day one, but this was after a long train of usurpations, right? That they finally wrote down the Declaration and sought independence. It's not option number one to fight a war. But furthermore, we don't want to be legalistic with freedom, because freedom is not the ultimate good. Rather, God, the author of our liberties, is the ultimate good. And the greatest way I think Dr. King would remind us today that we can honor God in this situation with coronavirus is by valuing human life above all things. And remember that in all things we should, honor the fact that God created all people in his image, and honor what the Declaration lays forth very clearly. This whole American experiment is built on this premise that life has value. So that should be priority number one, of protecting that. And that's something that I take out of this quote from Dr. King. I'm really glad you brought it up.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to our last question now, so I'm not going to keep you guys for too much longer.
What I'm going to offer, actually, Rajit, before you start, so I did mention we wanted to do a student Q&A. So here's how that'll work. Rajit will ask this question. We'll all go through and answer who would like to. And then speakers that have availability to stay 10 to 15 minutes after that to answer student questions are welcome to stay. And speakers that maybe have a meeting, we're going to honor the time we promised. So if you want to stay for that, just raise your hand at the end of question 8, and then I'll get a gauge of how many speakers, and then we'll allow students to ask questions. So yeah, Rajit, go ahead. Sorry for taking it.
Sure. So we've talked a bit about natural rights and individual liberty. So during the 2020 Democratic primary, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, has said that freedom also encompasses freedom from want and freedom from fear. He has further said that issues of healthcare and racial justice also fall under the banner of quote unquote freedom. Do you agree, or do you think that these issues should be discussed separately from the topic of individual liberties? Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to answer this question. Ms. Jan, I think your hand is up.
It is, yes, thank you. And I just wanted to comment on a specific section of this awesomely complex question. The idea that freedom from want is a desirable state. I wholeheartedly and completely disagree. I mean, we talk about the pursuit of happiness as being a uniquely American ideal and something that we all have a right to. That's wanting, that's yearning, that's desiring in whatever your individual definition of that is. And I think it's beautiful. It's something that I and many I'm privileged to know are willing to die for, quite frankly. So I just wanted to put that out there, that freedom from want is something that has propelled us as a society and a country to excellence, continued and sustained excellence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else would like to share? Is there anybody else who'd like to share anything about this?
Let's go to Bailey and Spencer. Yeah. And then Miss Colley can go after them.
Yeah, so this is definitely a fascinating question. I actually honestly didn't realize that Mayor Pete had spoken about the freedom from want and fear. I must have missed that speech, but I found it very interesting because regardless of whether he knew it or not, and he likely did, he was speaking, quoting President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served during the Great Depression, one of the most challenging eras in our country's history, as well as through World War II. And so he's a very interesting man, and I could comment on his character and his leadership, but I really just want to focus on here that this statement came from something later in his presidency, his second Bill of Rights, where he basically had a new vision for our country to heal and to come together after the Great Depression and through the Great Depression. And I admire his leadership. I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been to serve during that time. And I think there are things to learn from that. Nonetheless, I definitely find myself agreeing with where Jan is coming from, that these things are not necessarily in the purview of our government in America. It's really important for us to ask, like, what is the role of our government? Is its primary job to free us from want and fear? Or is its job to secure, first and foremost, our individual liberties, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness? That's certainly what our founding fathers believed, and I think we better have a very good reason if we want to change the role and the responsibilities of government. And so I think we just need to be very careful about expanding the role of government, because as we expand government to try to meet these needs of, freeing us from want and fear, then we're actually surrendering more and more of our liberty, because the more power government has, the less we do as individual citizens. Do you want to add to that, Spencer?
Yeah. First of all, I guess it's kind of an odd way he phrases it all, because of course we should be free from fear. Like, that's why you have a government, right? I should be able to walk in the street and expect the rule of law to kick in, and I shouldn't anticipate getting mugged every time I go outside. So if government's doing its job, I should be free from fear. But FDR was talking about like a very complex time where, things were in a crisis state, kind of like today. I think the important thing to remember is the role of government, like Bailey brought up. What we have to remember is that if we treat government like our mom and dad, that also affects how we view ourselves as citizens. And if I think of the government like my parents, then I view myself as the child in the relationship. And that's where the end of a free society filled with free, self-governing individuals ends, is the moment we view ourselves as the helpless children in the situation. We need to remember, like, we are the citizens. We run this, technically, if we take this seriously, right? If we want to give up on the freedom thing, we can totally change the arrangement. But if we want to be free and self-governing people, we can't view government as our mom and dad. And furthermore, practically speaking, government cannot take care of us all, right? Government doesn't have a single penny of its own money. They don't sell shoes. They don't make anything. The only reason they could give money to anybody is because they took it from someone else already. And so you can't take care of everybody that way, right? Unless they do start selling shoes or something, but they're not going to do that. So I like the arrangement we have right now, where we do trust in ourselves and our neighbors and our communities to take care of our primary needs, and we look out for the primary needs of our neighbors and our communities first, because that's what it is to be free and self-governing. It comes with the burden of responsibility, but that's the flip side of the blessing of freedom, is you have to work at it, and it's not always easy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. Ms. Kali, I think your hand is up as well.
Yeah, thank you for drawing attention to this Franklin Roosevelt quote that Buttigieg picked up on. So that was part of his For Freedom speech, and he identified that freedom from fear would require worldwide arms reduction, so that no individual country could strong arm another. And in fact, it was interesting because the Pentagon just recently issued a couple of statements, or members of the Pentagon calling for similar demilitarization, saying to our representatives, what are you doing, right? Like, we're experts in security, and we're telling you that you need to listen to us and reallocate resources to the real threats to human safety. This country spends over 60% of discretionary money on war preparedness. And we're also the largest weapons exporter on the planet. And yet, freedom from want, which doesn't mean desire. It's not an emotional state. It means housing for the homeless, food for the planet, protection from abuse, equal access to health and justice. Those are neglected. So how can a globe be free from fear with that kind of mismanagement of resources? But I want to consider the framing the world, again, with different voices. Buttigieg himself redlined and dispossessed many Black and brown people in his district. So while I appreciate his resurrection of this quote, I want to remind everyone of the MLK and Audre Lorde quotes that I started with, who both of whom erased this imagined line between individuals and collectives in order to erase the idea that inequality can be possible, right? So like, the world cannot possibly be just with major inequality, especially an inequality in the way that we spend money on the things that we say that we value. So when you're sick, healthcare is an individual right. When you're denied access to your livelihood or your life because of your race, that's individual too. So our personal lives are always political, and our political lives are always personal. And I appreciate some of the other speakers who articulated the responsibilities that come with democratic rights. Fear and want are not emotional conditions. Like, if you've ever been hungry, you know that the word want is not referencing a desire for a sports car. And if you've ever lived in real fear, you know that we're talking about people's ability to walk out on the streets safely. Not emotional conditions, they're political ones with major economic implications. And I think that looking at how our tax dollars are spent and managing and holding our government accountable for the way it spends its our resources is a major part of our democratic responsibilities. And I think that thinking really critically and carefully, not just about this quote, but about all of the questions that were asked on this really great panel today, require us to think about what it means to take responsibility in a moment of crisis, and where we would like to hold others accountable, and what kind of institutions we feel should or are responsive to our demands. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I'm sorry, did Ms. Bacy, did you put your hand down?
I did. She went ahead. I mean, I cannot say what she said any better. And so, you know, I just would have said that I really need to repeat what she said. And so, no, I just absolutely agree with everything that she said, that I think that she really framed this entire conversation when she spoke about that Lord quote and that MLK quote at the very beginning, in that we have to make sure that we're looking at each other's, that our own personal privileges are not overshadowed by what else somebody else is dealing with, or somebody else's or somebody else's discrimination somebody else feels. And so I think about when we talk about like individual liberties and we talk about wanting and from fear, what we're looking at there is we're talking about what you said, the idea of insecurity, food insecurity, healthcare insecurity. If those are individual rights, those have to be individual liberties, because if you don't feel safe walking down the street because you're African American, you don't have the right to freedom, like you said, the right of commerce, the right to come and go. If you don't know if you're going to be able to take care of, have health care, you don't have the right to pursue certain things. You don't have, because you're worried about certain things and that's what I think we're talking about. We're talking about certain fears that you have. Because I don't have this, are my individual liberties infringed upon? And when we talk about the government, we have to remember the government was supposed to be for the people, by the people. Okay, so, and I view the relationship between government and the people should be more of one boss, employee. That's what our government needs to work for us. We're the ones who are supposed to say, this is the goal of the government. And then we have the government exact and carry out and implement our desires, our wishes. Currently looking at now what we see a lot with these bailouts. The first bailout happened to the banks. That was enough to wipe out student loan debt. Now, as someone who has gone to a private institution and gone to law school, when I look at that number, that astronomical number of what I feel like I have to pay, what's under my belt, and even members of my family, and that the government can, within minutes, give that to banks, that kind of put them back in the same situation. We look and say, then like I said, that money does come from, another panel said that money comes from somewhere, it comes from us. So we didn't determine what happened with that money. And so we had elected officials that may have determined that, but then that's where our job is to step in and say, are they working for us or are they working for corporations? It's not our job to pay the government and then me to depend on my family to supply my needs as well. It's our job of the government. We've paid our taxes. Then we now need to go ahead and say, this is how we want our money and our allocation spent, as far as that goes, in order to make sure that we are assuaging our healthcare, our wants, our freedoms, and our wants, or I say wants, our needs, our freedoms are from fear and our needs.
Thank you so much. I believe Judge George has his hand up as well. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this. Also, I wanted to let Bailey and Spencer, I agree with you, and government not only produce anything and they know how to print it from a printer, money. I mean, and so we just printed $2.1 trillion, just printed. That money we didn't have. So, but this is an issue, this question, I just wanted to say, that's the very reason why those who are listening, young people listening to us. And this is also an area where that's the very reason why there is a civil duty or responsibility to get engaged. And the United States is a country where when we have a presidential election, many cases, more than 40% of the population, we are around close to 332 million people. Around, of course, all of them are not registered voters, but more than 40% of the people doesn't even participate in that process. And so, but we complain about it. And so my message to the young people who are listening to me, and I just want you to know that when I came to this country, the first thing I need to do was learning English, because I didn't have the luxury to go to an English medium school and study and learn. And I learned my English in my adult years. But I decided, we wanted to do this. I wanted to do this because I wanted to leave a mark. I wanted to leave some hope for the young people, especially people who don't think they have an opportunity to express themselves. And that's my hope, is listening to this, participating in this. You are more engaged citizen. You could be the next mayor, you could be the next local elected official, school board member, and you could be at the end of the day the president of this country. And that's the freedom, that's the opportunities out there. And so that's one thing I wanted to leave you with the thought. It is, we are not perfect, but we can make this better, because if we all decided to engage and be participant, not spectator, and that's the message I have for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge George. Miss Jan, I think your hand is still up. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I just had a quick follow-on point. First of all, yes, please listen to Judge George. And if you are old enough to, please go vote. There are primaries in July with usually embarrassingly low turnout. So research and vote. And I also wanted to add, I'm very pro-America, and as you can tell. And so yes, my initial response is on want as a desire, but it is unrealistic to expect that the human society or organism can be free from fear. That's part of the human condition. If you prescribe to a Christian worldview, which I wholeheartedly do, I am a Christian, you can see that in the Bible. If you have spent time in parts of the world without the rule of law, I was privileged to spend 2011 on the ground as a photographer in Afghanistan with the rule of law field force Afghanistan, okay? And there are no massive weapons there. It feels like you've stepped back 1,000 years in time, like nothing's changed, and in many ways it hasn't. There are parts of the world where there is so much hatred and malice that no government, no system, no process can really impact that, in my personal opinion. So the idea that freedom from fear is something that it's even worthwhile to endeavor toward, I question that. I question that in a global view. So thank you.
So much. It was a pleasure speaking with all of you. Thank you so much for participating in this panel interview and for such a stimulating discussion. I think it's given us all a lot to think about. I think I'm going to transfer to Ashley now and ask her.
Yeah. Sorry, Rajit. I'm going to take it from here. So for you all that have other obligations, I know I'm 10 minutes over my promised time. And that is my biggest pet peeve. So for everyone that needs to leave, I just want to say one quick thing. So thank you so much for taking the time to making this dream of just something that I thought up of and me and the coordinators worked together on in the speaker committee. Thank you for making it a reality. It's been amazing, and thank you for starting conversations within our district. Thank you for showing youth that they have options, and thank you for showing youth that they're entitled to an opinion, and in order to have that opinion, that needs to be grounded in truth. So we've talked about that today, and I appreciate that. So for those of you that are willing to stay and answer a few questions from students, I'm going to go to you really quickly, Judge George. But for those of you that need to leave right away, I will be sending a follow-up email later today or tomorrow morning, where if you are willing, for those of you, I will, sorry, blanked out for a second. So for those of you that are willing to do Q&A or follow up with the students that are going to be viewing on April 25th, I will send out a email tomorrow with information about how that would work, and you can send in your contact information. And I would like to hear feedback for how you thought this panel went as well in that email, so I'll be sending a little survey. So just be looking out for an email from me. And Judge George, would you like to comment? And anyone that wants to say.
I wanted to add real quick, after I came into office, we opened up our office for one of the best way to learn our government is volunteering and participating, and we opened it up for our young people. we have opportunity, throughout the summer, and also a semester, full semester you could volunteer with our office. And so any young people, I mean, that's the best way, because we had many people last year came here and said they never knew what county do. And what is a county jet? I'm not even a jet, but I'm called jet. And so the thing about it, how do you learn that? So I encourage you to come, go to our page, and if you wanted to learn or you wanted to volunteer, our hours are reportable hours. And so come and visit us. And also this is a historic courthouse. And that's, I thought I should just throw that out there, so that if anybody is looking to learn more about county government and how they can be part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I might take you up on that myself, Judge George. Yeah, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. For those of you that also have similar opportunities for volunteering and youth, I will allow you to share those with me in the email, and you are welcome. And I will throw those out to our people that are going to be on the 25th. So is anyone willing